Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Casablanca 1942 Movie Review. Casablanca is a 1942 American romantic drama film directed by Michael Curtiz and starring Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, and Paul Henriette. Filmed and set during World War II, it focuses on an American expatriate, Bogart, who must choose between his love for a woman, Bergman, and helping her husband, Henriette, a Czechoslovak resistance leader, escape from the Vichy-controlled city of Casablanca to continue his fight against the Nazis. The screenplay is based on Everybody Comes to Rick's, an unproduced stage play by Murray Burnett and Joan Allison. The supporting cast features Claude Rains, Conrad Veidt, Sidney Greenstreet, Peter Lorre, and Dooley Wilson. Warner Brothers. Story editor Irene Diamond convinced producer Hal B. Wallis to purchase the film rights to the play in January 1942. Brothers Julius and Philip G. Epstein were initially assigned to write the script. However, despite studio resistance, they left to work on Frank Capra's Why We Fight series early in 1942. Howard Cook was assigned to the screenplay until the Epsteins returned a month later. Principal photography began on May 25, 1942, ending on August 3. The film was shot entirely at Warner Brothers Studios in Burbank, California, with the exception of one sequence at Van Nuys Airport in Los Angeles. Although Casablanca was an A-list film with established stars and first-rate writers, no one involved with its production expected it to stand out among the many pictures produced by Hollywood yearly. Casablanca was rushed into release to take advantage of the publicity from the Allied invasion of North Africa a few weeks earlier. It had its world premiere on November 26, 1942, in New York City and was released nationally in the United States on January 23, 1943. The film was a solid, if unspectacular, success in its initial run. Exceeding expectations, Casablanca went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, while Curtiz was selected as Best Director and the Epsteins and Cook were honored for Best Adapted Screenplay. Its reputation has gradually grown, to the point that its lead characters, memorable lines, and pervasive theme song have all become iconic, and it consistently ranks near the top of lists of the greatest films in history. In the inaugural class of 1989, the United States Library of Congress selected the film as one of the first for preservation in the National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. The film's copyright was renewed in 1970, it will enter the public domain in the US and countries with the rule of the shorter term on January 1, 2038. Roger Ebert wrote, "If there is ever a time when they decide that some movies should be spelled with an uppercase M, Casablanca should be voted first on the list of movies." In December 1941, American expatriate Rick Blaine owns a nightclub and gambling den in Casablanca, then in French Morocco. Rick's Café Américain attracts a varied clientele, including Vichy French and German officials, refugees desperate to reach the still neutral United States, and those who prey on them. Although Rick professes to be neutral in all matters, he ran guns to Ethiopia in 1935 and fought on the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War. Petty crook Ugart boasts to Rick of letters of transit obtained by murdering 2 German couriers. The papers allow the bearers to travel freely around German-occupied Europe and to neutral Portugal. Ugart plans to sell them at the club and persuades Rick to hold them for him. However, Ugart is arrested by the local police under Captain Louis Renault, the unabashedly corrupt prefect of police. Ugart is killed while in custody without revealing that Rick has the letters. Then, the reason for Rick's cynical nature, former lover Ilse Lund enters his establishment. Spotting Sam, Rick's friend and house pianist, Ilse asks him to play as time goes by. Rick storms over, furious that Sam disobeyed his order to never perform that song again, and is stunned to see Ilse. She is accompanied by her husband, Victor Laszlo, a renowned fugitive Czechoslovak resistance leader. A flashback reveals Ilse left Rick without explanation when the couple were planning to flee as the German army neared Paris in 1940, embittering Rick. Laszlo and Ilse need the letters to escape, while German Major Strasser arrives in Casablanca to prevent that. When Laszlo makes inquiries, Signor Ferrari, an underworld figure and Rick's friendly business rival, divulges his suspicion that Rick has the letters. Laszlo returns to Rick's cafe that night and tries to buy them. Rick refuses to sell, telling Laszlo to ask his wife why. They are interrupted when Strasser leads a group of German officers in singing Die Wacht am Rhein. Laszlo orders the house band to play La Marseillaise, and Rick allows it. Patriotism grips the crowd and everyone joins in, drowning out the Germans. Afterwards, Strasser has Renaud close the club on a flimsy pretext. Later, Ilse confronts Rick in the deserted cafe. When he refuses to give her the letters, she threatens him with a gun but then confesses she still loves him. She explains that when they met and fell in love in Paris, she believed her husband had been killed while attempting to escape from a concentration camp. When she learned that Laszlo was alive and in hiding, she left Rick without explanation to nurse her sick husband. Rick's bitterness dissolves. He agrees to help, letting Ilse believe she will stay with him, while Laszlo leaves Casablanca. When Laszlo unexpectedly shows up, having narrowly escaped a police raid on a resistance meeting, Rick has waiter Carl spirit Ilse away. Laszlo, aware of Rick's love for Ilse, tries to persuade him to use the letters to take her to safety. When the police arrest Laszlo on a trumped-up charge, Rick persuades Renaud to release him by promising to set Laszlo up for a much more serious crime, possession of the letters. To allay Renaud's suspicions, Rick explains that he and Ilse will use the letters to leave for America. When Renaud tries to arrest Laszlo as arranged, however, Rick forces him at gunpoint to assist in their escape. At the last moment, Rick makes Ilse board the plane to Lisbon with Laszlo, telling her that she would regret it if she stayed, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your life. Strasser, tipped off by Renaud, drives up alone. Strasser attempts to stop the plane and then draws a gun on Rick. The latter shoots him dead. When policemen arrive, Renaud pauses, then orders them to round up the usual suspects. He suggests to Rick that they join the Free French in Brazzaville. As they walk away into the fog, Rick says, "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." Much of the emotional impact of the film, for the audience in 1942, has been attributed to the large proportion of European exiles and refugees who were extras or played minor roles, in addition to leading actors Paul Henriot, Conrad Veidt, and Peter Lorre, such as Louis V. Arco, Trude Berliner, Ilka Grunig, Ludwig Stossel, Hans-Heinrich von Twardowski, and Wolfgang Zilzer. A witness to the filming of the Duel of the Anthems sequence said he saw many of the actors crying and realized that they were all real refugees. Harmetz argues that they brought to a dozen small roles in Casablanca an understanding and a desperation that could never have come from central casting. Even though many were Jewish or refugees from the Nazis, or both, they were frequently cast as Nazis in various war films, because of their accents. Jack Benny may have appeared in an unbilled cameo, as was claimed by a contemporary newspaper advertisement and in the Casablanca press book. When asked in his column Movie Answer Man, critic Roger Ebert first replied, "It looks something like him. That's all I can say." In a later column, he responded to a follow-up commenter, "I think you're right." The Jack Benny fan club can feel vindicated. The film was based on Murray Burnett and Joan Allison's unproduced play Everybody Comes to Rick's. The Warner Brothers story analyst who read the play, Stephen Carnot, called it, approvingly, sophisticated hokum, and story editor Irene Diamond, who had discovered the script on a trip to New York in 1941, convinced Hal Wallis to buy the rights in January 1942 for $20,000, equivalent to $330,000 in 2024, the most anyone in Hollywood had ever paid for an unproduced play. The project was renamed Casablanca, apparently in imitation of the 1938 hit Algiers. Casablanca also shares many narrative and thematic similarities with Algiers, 1938, which itself is a remake of the acclaimed 1937 French film Pépé le Moko, directed and co-written by Julien Duvivier. The original play was inspired by a trip to Europe made by Murray Burnett and his wife in 1938, during which they visited Vienna shortly after the Anschluss and were affected by the anti-Semitism they saw. In the south of France, they went to a nightclub that had a multinational clientele, among them many exiles and refugees, and the prototype of Sam. In The Guardian, Paul Fairclough wrote that Cinema Vox in Tangier was Africa's biggest when it opened in 1935, with 2,000 seats and a retractable roof. As Tangier was in Spanish territory, the theater's wartime bar heaved with spies, refugees, and underworld hoods, securing its place in cinematic history as the inspiration for Rick's Café in Casablanca. The scene of the singing of La Marseillaise in the bar is attributed by the film scholar Julian Jackson as an adaptation of a similar scene from Jean Renoir's film La Grande Illusion 5 years prior. The first writers assigned to the script were twins Julius and Philip Epstein who, against the wishes of Warner Brothers, left at Frank Capra's request early in 1942 to work on the Why We Fight series in Washington, D.C. While they were gone, the other credited writer, Howard Koch, was assigned. He produced 30 to 40 pages. When the Epstein brothers returned after about a month, they were reassigned to Casablanca and contrary to what Koch claimed in 2 published books his work was not used. The Epstein brothers and Koch never worked in the same room at the same time during the writing of the script. In the final budget for the film, the Epsteins were paid $30,416, equivalent to $454,089 in 2024, and Koch earned $4,200, equivalent to $63,572 in 2024. In the play, the Ilsa character is an American named Lois Meredith. She does not meet Laszlo until after her relationship with Rick in Paris has ended. Rick is a lawyer. The play, set entirely in the cafe, ends with Rick sending Lois and Laszlo to the airport. To make Rick's motivation more believable, Wallis, Curtiz, and the screenwriters decided to set the film before the attack on Pearl Harbor. The possibility was discussed of Laszlo being killed in Casablanca, allowing Rick and Ilsa to leave together, but as Casey Robinson wrote to Wallis before filming began, the ending of the film is set up for a swell twist when Rick sends her away on the plane with Laszlo. For now, in doing so, he is not just solving a love triangle. He is forcing the girl to live up to the idealism of her nature, forcing her to carry on with the work that in these days is far more important than the love of 2 little people. It was certainly impossible for Ilsa to leave Laszlo for Rick, as the motion picture production code forbade showing a woman leaving her husband for another man. The concern was not whether Ilsa would leave with Laszlo, but how this outcome would be engineered. According to Julius Epstein, he and Philip were driving when they simultaneously came up with the idea for Renault to order the roundup of the usual suspects, after which all the details needed for resolution of the story, including the farewell between Bergman and a suddenly noble Bogart, were rapidly worked out. The uncredited Casey Robinson assisted with 3 weeks of rewrites, including contributing the series of meetings between Rick and Ilsa in the cafe. Koch highlighted the political and melodramatic elements, and Curtiz seems to have favored the romantic parts, insisting on retaining the Paris flashbacks. In a telegram to film editor Owen Marks on August 7, 1942, Wallis suggested 2 possible final lines of dialogue for Rick: Louis, I might have known you'd mix your patriotism with a little larceny, or Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. 2 weeks later, Wallis settled on the latter, which Bogart was recalled to dub a month after shooting had finished. Bogart's line "Here's looking at you, kid," said 4 times, was not in the draft screenplays, but has been attributed to a comment he made to Bergman as she played poker with her English coach and hairdresser between takes. Despite the many writers, the film has what Ebert describes as a wonderfully unified and consistent script. Koch later claimed it was the tension between his own approach and Curtiz that had accounted for this. Surprisingly, these disparate approaches somehow meshed, and perhaps it was partly this tug of war between Curtiz and me that gave the film a certain balance. Julius Epstein later noted the screenplay contained more corn than in the states of Kansas and Iowa combined. But when corn works, there's nothing better. The film ran into some trouble with Joseph Breen of the Production Code Administration, the Hollywood self-censorship body, who opposed the suggestions that Captain Renault extorted sexual favors from visa applicants, and that Rick and Ilsa had slept together. Extensive changes were made, with several lines of dialogue removed or altered. All direct references to sex were deleted, Renault's selling of visas for sex and Rick and Ilsa's previous sexual relationship were implied elliptically rather than referenced explicitly. Also, in the original script, when Sam plays As Time Goes By, Rick exclaims, "What the are you playing?" This line was altered to Sam, "I thought I told you never to play," to conform to Breen's objection to an implied swear word. Although an initial filming date was selected for April 10, 1942, delays led to production starting on May 25. Filming was completed on August 3. It went $75,000 over budget for a total cost of $1,039,000, equivalent to $15,727,000 in 2024, above average for the time. Unusually, the film was shot in sequence, mainly because only the first half of the script was ready when filming began. The entire picture was shot in the studio except for the sequence showing Strasser's arrival and close-ups of the Lockheed Electra, filmed at Van Nuys Airport, and a few short clips of stock footage views of Paris. The street used for the exterior shots had recently been built for another film, The Desert Song, and redressed for the Paris flashbacks. The film critic Roger Ebert called Wallis the key creative force for his attention to the details of production, down to insisting on a real parrot in the Blue Parrot Bar. The difference between Bergman's and Bogart's height caused some problems. She was 2 inches, 5 centimeters, taller than Bogart, and claimed Curtiz had Bogart stand on blocks or sit on cushions in their scenes together. Later, there were plans for a further scene, showing Rick, Renault, and a detachment of Free French soldiers on a ship, to incorporate the Allies' 1942 invasion of North Africa. It proved too difficult to get Claude Rains for the shoot, and the scene was finally abandoned after David O. Selznick judged it would be a terrible mistake to change the ending. The background of the final scene, which shows a Lockheed Model 12 Electra Junior airplane with personnel walking around it, was staged using little person extras and a proportionate cardboard plane. Fog was used to mask the model's unconvincing appearance. Wallis's first choice for director was William Wyler, but he was unavailable, so Wallis turned to his close friend Michael Curtiz. Roger Ebert has commented that in Casablanca very few shots are memorable as shots, as Curtiz wanted images to express the story rather than to stand alone. He contributed relatively little to development of the plot. Casey Robinson said Curtiz knew nothing whatever about story, he saw it in pictures, and you supplied the stories. Critic Andrew Sarris called the film the most decisive exception to the auteur theory, of which Sarris was the most prominent proponent in the United States. Algian Harmetz has responded, nearly every Warner Brothers picture was an exception to the auteur theory. Other critics give more credit to Curtiz. Sidney Rosenzweig, in his study of the director's work, sees the film as a typical example of Curtiz's highlighting of moral dilemmas. Some of the second unit montages, such as the opening sequence of the refugee trail and the invasion of France, were directed by Don Siegel. The cinematographer was Arthur Edison, a veteran who had previously shot The Maltese Falcon and Frankenstein. Particular attention was paid to photographing Bergman. She was shot mainly from her preferred left side, often with a softening gauze filter and with catch lights to make her eyes sparkle. The whole effect was designed to make her face seem ineffably sad and tender and nostalgic. Bars of shadow across the characters and in the background variously imply imprisonment, the cross of Lorraine the symbol of the Free French forces and emotional turmoil. Dark film noir and expressionist lighting was used in several scenes, particularly towards the end of the picture. Rosenzweig argues these shadow and lighting effects are classic elements of the Curtiz style, along with the fluid camera work and the use of the environment as a framing device. The music was written by Max Steiner. The song As Time Goes by Hermann Hupfeld had been part of the story from the original play. Steiner wanted to write his own composition to replace it, but Bergman had already cut her hair short for her next role, Maria in For Whom the Bell Tolls, and could not reshoot the scenes that incorporated the song, so Steiner based the entire score on it and La Marseillaise, the French national anthem, transforming them as leitmotifs to reflect changing moods. Even though Steiner disliked As Time Goes By, he admitted in a 1943 interview that it must have had something to attract so much attention. The song enjoyed a resurgence after the release of Casablanca, spending 21 weeks on the hit parade. Particularly memorable is the duel of the anthems between Strasser and Laszlo at Rick's Cafe. In the soundtrack, La Marseillaise is played by a full orchestra. Originally, the opposing piece for this iconic sequence was to be the Horst Wessel Lied, a Nazi anthem, but this was still under international copyright in non-Allied countries. Instead, Die Wacht am Rhein was used. The Deutschlandlied, the national anthem of Germany, is used several times in minor mode as a leitmotif for the German threat, e.g. in the scene in Paris as it is announced that the German army will reach Paris the next day. It is featured in the final scene, giving way to La Marseillaise after Strasser is shot. Dooley Wilson, who played Sam, was a drummer, not a pianist, so his piano playing was performed by Gene Plummer. After shooting had been completed, producer Wallis considered dubbing over Wilson's voice for his singing. Very few films in the early 1940s had portions of the soundtrack released on 78 RPM records, and Casablanca was no exception. In 1997, almost 55 years after the film's premiere, Turner Entertainment in collaboration with Rhino Records issued the film's first original soundtrack album for release on compact disc, including original songs and music, spoken dialogue, and alternate takes. The piano featured in the Paris flashback sequences was sold in New York City on December 14, 2012, at Sotheby's for more than $600,000 to an anonymous bidder. The piano Sam plays in Rick's Café Américain, put up for auction with other film memorabilia by Turner Classic Movies at Bonhams in New York on November 24, 2014, sold for $3.4 million. Although an initial release date was anticipated for early 1943, Casablanca premiered at the Hollywood Theater in New York City on November 26, 1942, to capitalize on Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of French North Africa, and the capture of Casablanca. It went into general release on January 23, 1943, to take advantage of the Casablanca Conference, a high-level meeting in the city between Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The Office of War Information prevented screening of the film to troops in North Africa, believing it would cause resentment among Vichy supporters in the region. On March 19, 1943, the film was banned in Ireland for infringing on the Emergency Powers Order preserving wartime neutrality, by portraying Vichy France and Nazi Germany in a sinister light. It was passed with cuts on June 15, 1945, shortly after the EPO was lifted. The cuts were made to dialogue between Rick and Ilsa referring to their love affair. A version with only one scene cut was passed on July 16, 1974. Irish national broadcaster Root inquired about showing the film on TV, but found it still required a dialogue cut to Ilsa expressing her love for Rick. Warner Brothers released a heavily edited version of Casablanca in West Germany in 1952. All scenes with Nazis were removed, along with most references to World War II. Important plot points were altered when the dialogue was dubbed into German. Victor Laszlo was no longer a resistance fighter who escaped from a Nazi concentration camp. Instead, he became a Norwegian atomic physicist who was being pursued by Interpol after he broke out of jail. The West German version was 25 minutes shorter than the original cut. A German version of Casablanca with the original plot was not released until 1975. Casablanca received consistently good reviews. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times wrote, "The Warners have a picture which makes the spine tingle and the heart take a leap. He applauded the combination of sentiment, humor, and pathos with taut melodrama and bristling intrigue. Crowther noted its devious convolutions of the plot and praised the screenplay quality as of the best and the cast's performances as all of the first order. The trade paper Variety commended the film's combination of fine performances, engrossing story, and neat direction, and the variety of moods, action, suspense, comedy and drama that makes Casablanca an A1 entry at the BO. 98. The review observed that the film is splendid anti-Axis propaganda, particularly inasmuch as the propaganda is strictly a byproduct of the principal action and contributes to it instead of getting in the way. Variety also applauded the performances of Bergman and Henriette and noted, Bogart, as might be expected, is more at ease as the bitter and cynical operator of a joint than as a lover, but handles both assignments with superb finesse. Some reviews were less enthusiastic. The New Yorker rated Casablanca only pretty tolerable and said it was not quite up to Across the Pacific, Bogart's last spyfest. At the 1,500-seat Hollywood Theater, the film grossed $255,000 over 10 weeks, equivalent to $3.9 million in 2024. In its initial American release, Casablanca was a substantial, but not spectacular, box office success, earning $3.7 million, equivalent to $56 million in 2024. A 50th anniversary release grossed $1.5 million in 1992. According to Warner Brothers records, the film earned $3,398,000 domestically and $3,461,000 in foreign markets. In the decades since its release, the film has grown in reputation. Murray Burnett called it true yesterday, true today, true tomorrow. By 1955, the film had brought in $6.8 million, making it the third most successful of Warner's wartime movies, behind Shine On, Harvest Moon and This Is the Army. On April 21, 1957, the Brattle Theatre of Cambridge, Massachusetts, showed the film as part of a season of old movies. It proved so popular that a tradition began in which Casablanca would be screened during the week of final exams at Harvard University. Todd Gitlin, a professor of sociology who had attended one of these screenings, has said that the experience was the acting out of my own personal rite of passage. The tradition helped the film remain popular while other films that had been famous in the 1940s have faded from popular memory. By 1977, Casablanca had become the most frequently broadcast film on American television. Ingrid Bergman's portrayal of Ilse Lund in Casablanca became one of her best-known roles. In later years she said, "I feel about Casablanca that it has a life of its own. There is something mystical about it. It seems to have filled a need that was there before the film, a need that the film filled." On the film's 50th anniversary, the Los Angeles Times called Casablanca's great strength the purity of its golden age Hollywoodness, the enduring craftsmanship of its resonantly hokey dialogue. Bob Strauss wrote in the newspaper that the film achieved a near-perfect entertainment balance of comedy, romance, and suspense. There are greater movies. More profound movies. Movies of greater artistic vision or artistic originality or political significance. One of the movies we treasure the most. This is a movie that has transcended the ordinary categories. In his opinion, the film is popular because the people in it are all so good and it is a wonderful gem. He said that he had never heard of a negative review of the film, even though individual elements can be criticized, citing unrealistic special effects and the stiff character of Laszlo as portrayed by Henriette. Ebert also wrote, "Seeing the film over and over again, year after year, I find it never grows overfamiliar. It plays like a familiar musical album. The more I know it, the more I like it. The black and white cinematography has not aged as color would. The dialogue is so spare and cynical it has not grown old-fashioned. Much of the emotional effect of Casablanca is achieved by indirection. As we leave the theater, we are absolutely convinced that the only thing keeping the world from going crazy is the concerns of three little people who do, after all, amount to more than a hill of beans." Critic and film historian Leonard Maltin considers Casablanca the best Hollywood movie of all time. According to Rudy Bilmer, the character of Rick is not a hero, not a bad guy because he does what is necessary to appease the authorities and sticks his neck out for nobody. Bilmer feels that the other characters are not cut and dried and come into their goodness over the course of the film. Renault begins as a collaborator with the Nazis who extort sexual favors from refugees and has Ugart killed. Even Ilsa, the least active of the main characters, is caught in the emotional struggle over which man she really loves. By the end, however, everybody is sacrificing. Bilmer also emphasized the variety in the picture. It's a blend of drama, melodrama, comedy, and intrigue. Scott Tobias, writing for The Guardian on the film's 80th anniversary, calls it the jewel of Hollywood's golden age, and the best example of the system of filmmaking working, due not to an artistic genius but a combination of talented writing, set design, music, casting, supporting characters, and production. A few reviewers have expressed reservations. To Pauline Kael, it's far from a great film, but it has a special appealingly schlocky romanticism. Umberto Eco wrote that by any strict critical standards, Casablanca is a very mediocre film. He viewed the changes that the characters manifest as inconsistent rather than complex. It is a comic strip, a hodgepodge, low on psychological credibility, and with little continuity in its dramatic effects. However, he added that because of the presence of multiple archetypes that allow the power of narrative in its natural state without art intervening to discipline it, it is a film reaching Homeric depths as a phenomenon worthy of awe. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 99% of 136 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 9.5/10. The website's consensus reads, "An undisputed masterpiece and perhaps Hollywood's quintessential statement on love and romance, Casablanca has only improved with age, boasting career-defining performances from Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman." On Metacritic, the film has a perfect score of 100 out of 100, based on 18 critics, indicating universal acclaim. It is one of the few films in the site's history to achieve a perfect aggregate score. In the November/December 1982 issue of Film Comment, Chuck Ross wrote that he retyped the Casablanca screenplay, reverting the title to Everybody Comes to Rick's and changing the name of Sam the piano player to Dooley, after Dooley Wilson, who played the character, and submitted it to 217 agencies. The majority of agencies returned the script unread, often because of policies regarding unsolicited screenplays, or did not respond. However, of those which did respond, only 33 specifically recognized it as Casablanca. 8 others observed that it was similar to Casablanca, and 41 agencies rejected the screenplay outright, offering comments such as too much dialogue, not enough exposition, the storyline was weak, and in general didn't hold my interest. 3 agencies offered to represent the screenplay, and 1 suggested turning it into a novel. Many subsequent films have drawn on elements of Casablanca. Passage to Marseille, 1944, reunited actors Bogart, Rains, Greenstreet, and Laurie and director Curtiz in 1944, and there are similarities between Casablanca and a later Bogart film, To Have and Have Not, also 1944. Parodies have included the Marx Brothers' A Night in Casablanca, 1946, Neil Simon's The Cheap Detective, 1978, and Out Cold, 2001. Indirectly, it provided the title for the 1995 neo-noir film The Usual Suspects. Woody Allen's Play It Again, Sam, 1972, appropriated Rick Blaine as the fantasy mentor for Allen's character. The film was a plot device in the science fiction television movie Overdrawn at the Memory Bank, 1983, based on John Varley's story. The story's protagonist recreates settings from the film inside a virtual reality simulation, including a version of Rick who becomes an advisor and ally. Both characters are played by lead actor Raul Julia. It was referred to in Terry Gilliam's dystopian Brazil, 1985. Warner Brothers produced its own parody, Casablanca, a 1995 Bugs Bunny cartoon. The film critic Roger Ebert pointed out the plot of the film Barbed Wire, 1996, was identical to that of Casablanca. In Casablanca, a novella by Argentine writer Edgar Brau, the protagonist somehow wanders into Rick's Café Americain and listens to a strange tale related by Sam. The 2016 musical film La La Land contains allusions to Casablanca in the imagery, dialogue, and plot. Robert Zemeckis, director of Allied, 2016, which is also set in 1942 Casablanca, studied the film to capture the city's elegance. The 2017 Moroccan drama film Razia, directed by Nabil Ayouch, is mostly set in the city of Casablanca, and its characters frequently discuss the 1942 film. Because of its November 1942 release, the New York Film Critics decided to include the film in its 1942 award season for Best Picture. Casablanca lost to In Which We Serve. However, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences stated that since the film went into national release at the beginning of 1943, it would be included in that year's nominations. Casablanca was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, and won 3. As Bogart stepped out of his car at the awards ceremony, the crowd surged forward, almost engulfing him and his wife, Mayo Method. It took 12 police officers to rescue the two, and a red-faced, startled, yet smiling Bogart heard a chorus of cries of "Good luck and here's looking at you, kid," as he was rushed into the theater. When the award for Best Picture was announced, producer Hal B. Wallis got up to accept, but studio head Jack L. Warner rushed up to the stage with a broad, flashing smile and a look of great self-satisfaction. Wallis later recalled, "I couldn't believe it was happening. Casablanca had been my creation, Jack had absolutely nothing to do with it." As the audience gasped, "I tried to get out of the row of seats and into the aisle, but the entire Warner family sat blocking me. I had no alternative but to sit down again, humiliated and furious. Almost 40 years later, I still haven't recovered from the shock." In 1989, the film was one of the first 25 films selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry as being deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. In 2005, it was named one of the 100 greatest films of the last 80 years by Time magazine. The selected films were not ranked. Bright Lights Film Journal stated in 2007, "It is one of those rare films from Hollywood's golden age which has managed to transcend its era to entertain generations of moviegoers." Casablanca provides 21st-century Americans with an oasis of hope in a desert of arbitrary cruelty and senseless violence. The film also ranked at number 28 on Empire's list of the 100 greatest movies of all time, which said, "Love, honor, thrills, wisecracks and a hit tune are among the attractions, which also include a perfect supporting cast of villains, sneaks, thieves, refugees and bar staff." But it's Bogart and Bergman's show, entering immortality as screen lovers reunited only to part. The irrefutable sick proof that great movies are accidents. Screenwriting teacher Robert McKee maintains that the script is the greatest screenplay of all time. In 2006, the Writers Guild of America, West agreed, voting it the best ever in its list of the 101 greatest screenplays. Casablanca has been subjected to many readings. Semioticians account for the film's popularity by claiming that its inclusion of stereotypes paradoxically strengthens the film. Thus Casablanca is not just one film. It is many films, an anthology. Made haphazardly, it probably made itself, if not actually against the will of its authors and actors, then at least beyond their control. And this is the reason it works, in spite of aesthetic theories and theories of filmmaking. For in it there unfolds with almost telluric force the power of narrative in its natural state, without art intervening to discipline it. When all the archetypes burst in shamelessly, we reach Homeric depths. 2 clichés make us laugh. 100 clichés move us. For we sense dimly that the clichés are talking among themselves, and celebrating a reunion. Eco also singled out sacrifice as a theme. The myth of sacrifice runs through the whole film. It was this theme that resonated with a wartime audience who were reassured by the idea that painful sacrifice and going off to war could be romantic gestures done for the greater good. Cook also considered the film a political allegory. Rick is compared to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who gambled on the odds of going to war until circumstance and his own submerged nobility force him to close his casino, partisan politics, and commit himself first by financing the side of right and then by fighting for it. The connection is reinforced by the film's title, which means White House. Harvey Greenberg presents a Freudian reading in his The Movies on Your Mind, in which the transgressions that prevent Rick from returning to the United States constitute an Oedipus complex, which is resolved only when Rick begins to identify with the father figure of Laszlo and the cause that he represents. Sidney Rosenzweig argues that such readings are reductive and that the most important aspect of the film is its ambiguity, above all in the central character of Rick. He cites the different names that each character gives Rick: Richard, Ricky, Mr. Rick, Herr Rick, and Boss, as evidence of the different meanings that he has for each person. Casablanca was initially released on Betamax and VHS by Magnetic Video and later by CBS/Fox Video, as United Artists owned the distribution rights at the time. In 1989, the Criterion Collection released a Laserdisc release sourced from a nitrate print. This includes supplements such as an audio commentary by Ronald Haver, a treatment for an unreleased sequel, and wartime footage of the city of Casablanca. Criterion issued a CLV version of this in 1991 with only the film and commentary. It was next released on Laserdisc in 1991, and on VHS in 1992, both from MGM/UA Home Entertainment, distributing for Turner Entertainment Co., which at the time was distributed by Warner Home Video. It was first released on DVD in 1998 by MGM, containing the trailer and a making-of featurette. Warner Home Video reissued the DVD in 2000. A subsequent 2-disc special edition, containing an audio commentary by Roger Ebert, documentaries, Carrot Blanca, and a newly remastered visual and audio presentation, was released in 2003. An HD DVD was released on November 14, 2006, containing the same special features as the 2003 DVD. Reviewers were impressed with the new high-definition transfer of the film. A Blu-ray release with new special features came out on December 2, 2008, it is also available on DVD. The Blu-ray was initially only released as an expensive gift set with a booklet, a luggage tag and other assorted gift-type items. It was eventually released as a standalone Blu-ray in September 2009. On March 27, 2012, Warner released a new 70th Anniversary Ultimate Collector's Edition Blu-ray/DVD combo set. It includes a brand new 4K restoration and new bonus material. This 4K restoration was completed at Warner Bros. Digital imaging from a nitrate print, because the original negative no longer exists. Almost from the moment Casablanca became a hit, talk began of producing a sequel. One titled Brazzaville. In the final scene, Renaud recommends fleeing to that free French-held city, was planned, but never produced. A newspaper article at the time mentioned that Bogart and Greenstreet will continue their characterizations from the first film, and it's likely that Geraldine Fitzgerald will have an important role. Since then, no studio has seriously considered filming a sequel or outright remake. François Truffaut refused an invitation to remake the film in 1974, citing its cult status among American students as his reason. Attempts to recapture the magic of Casablanca in other settings, such as Cabo Blanco, 1980, a South American set retooling of Casablanca, and Havana, 1990, have been poorly received. Stories of a Casablanca remake or sequel nonetheless persist. In 2008, Madonna was reported to be pursuing a remake set in modern-day Iraq. In 2012, both the Daily Telegraph and Entertainment Weekly reported on efforts by Cass Warner, granddaughter of Harry Warner and friend of the late Howard Cooke, to produce a sequel featuring the search by Rick Blaine and Ilsa Lund's illegitimate son for the whereabouts of his biological father. Several adaptations of the film were aired on radio. The two best known are a 30-minute adaptation on the Screen Guild Theatre on April 26, 1943, starring Bogart, Bergman, and Ingrid, and an hour-long version on the Lux Radio Theatre on January 24, 1944, featuring Alan Ladd as Rick, Hedy Lamarr as Ilsa, and John Loder as Laszlo. Two other 30-minute adaptations were aired, one on Philip Morris Playhouse on September 3, 1943, and the other on Theatre of Romance on December 19, 1944, in which Dooley Wilson reprised his role as Sam. On television, there have been two short-lived series based upon Casablanca, both sharing the title. The first Casablanca aired on ABC as part of the Will series Warner Brothers. Presents in hour-long episodes from 1955 to 1956. It was a Cold War espionage program set contemporaneously with its production, and starred Charles McGraw as Rick and Marcel Dolio, who had played Emile the croupier in the movie, as the police chief. The second Casablanca, broadcast on NBC in April 1983, starred David Soul as Rick and was cancelled after 3 weeks. The novel As Time Goes By, written by Michael Walsh and published in 1998, was authorized by Warner. The novel picks up where the film leaves off, and also tells of Rick's mysterious past in America. The book met with little success. David Thompson provided an unofficial sequel in his 1985 novel Suspects. Julius Epstein made 2 attempts to turn the film into a Broadway musical, in 1951 and 1967, but neither made it to the stage. The original play, Everybody Comes to Rick's, was produced in Newport, Rhode Island, in August 1946, and again in London in April 1991, but met with no success. The film was adapted into a musical by the Takarazuka Revue, an all-female Japanese musical theater company, and ran from November 2009 through February 2010. Casablanca Box, written by Sarah Farrington and directed by Reed Farrington, premiered in New York in 2017 and was an imagined making of the film. It was nominated for 2 2017 Drama Desk Awards, Unique Theatrical Experience and Outstanding Projection Design. The New York Times described it as a brave, almost foolhardy undertaking, presenting the backstage drama during the making of Casablanca. Casablanca was part of the film colorization controversy of the 1980s. In 1984, MGM/UA hired Color Systems Technology to colorize the film for $180,000. When Ted Turner of Turner Broadcasting System purchased MGM/UA's film library 2 years later, he canceled the request, before contracting American Film Technologies, AFT, in 1988. AFT completed the colorization in 2 months at a cost of $450,000. When the colorized film debuted on WTBS in November 1988, it was watched by 3 million viewers, failing to make the top 10 viewed cable shows for the week. Leaders of the Directors Guild of America called it a new low point in the battle to degrade an American art form. The Library of Congress deemed that the color change differed so much from the original film that it gave a new copyright to Turner Entertainment. Although Jack Matthews of the Los Angeles Times called the finished product state-of-the-art, it was mostly met with negative critical reception. It was briefly available on home video. Gary Edgerton, writing for the Journal of Popular Film and Television, criticized the colorization, stating that Casablanca in color ended up being much blander in appearance and, overall, much less visually interesting than its 1942 predecessor. Bogart's son, Stephen, said, "If you're going to colorize Casablanca, why not put arms on the Venus de Milo?" Turner later reacted to criticism of the colorization, saying, "Casablanca is one of a handful of films that really doesn't have to be colorized. I did it because I wanted to. All I'm trying to do is protect my investment." Several unfounded rumors and misconceptions have grown around the film, one being that Ronald Reagan was originally chosen to play Rick. This originated in a press release issued by the studio early on in the film's development. By that time the studio already knew that he was going into the army, and he was never seriously considered. George Raft claimed that he had turned down the lead role, but studio records make it clear that Wallis was committed to Bogart from the start. Another story is that the actors did not know until the last day of shooting how the film was to end. Cook later acknowledged, "When we began, we didn't have a finished script. Ingrid Bergman came to me and said, 'Which man should I love more?' I said to her, 'I don't know, play them both evenly.' You see, we didn't have an ending, so we didn't know what was going to happen." While rewrites did occur during filming, Algian Harmet's examination of the scripts has shown that many of the key scenes were shot after Bergman knew how the film would end. Any confusion was, according to critic Roger Ebert, emotional, not factual. The film has several logical flaws, one being the letters of transit that enable their bearers to leave Vichy French territory. Ugart says the letters had been signed by, depending on the listener, either Vichy General Weygand or Free French General de Gaulle. The French subtitles on the official DVD read Weygand, the English ones de Gaulle. Weygand had been the Vichy delegate general for the North African colonies until November 1941, a month before the film is set. De Gaulle was the head of the Free French government in exile in London, so a letter signed by him would have provided no benefit. The letters were invented as a MacGuffin by Joan Allison for the original play and never questioned. In the same vein, though Laszlo asserts that the Nazis cannot arrest him, saying, "This is still unoccupied France, any violation of neutrality would reflect on Captain Renault," Ebert points out, "It makes no sense that he could walk around freely. He would be arrested on sight." 16 No. Uniformed German troops were stationed in Casablanca during World War II, and neither American nor French troops occupied Berlin in 1918, despite Renault's retort to Strasser, who calls Rick a blundering American. A line closely associated with Casablanca, "Play it again, Sam," is not spoken in the film. When Ilsa first enters the Café Américain, she spots Sam and asks him, "Play it once, Sam, for old time's sake." After he feigns ignorance, she responds, "Play it, Sam. Play as time goes by." Later that night, alone with Sam, Rick says, "You played it for her, you can play it for me, and if she can stand it, I can. Play it." Casablanca is one of the peaks of the studio system that plays up all the strengths of classic Hollywood storytelling, larger-than-life stars playing well-drawn characters in a memorable scenario with beautiful production. Full-tilt American romanticism, bittersweet lost love gets its second chance, but self-sacrifice and nobility win out. Cinematic romance raised to perfection. The movie is absolutely gorgeous, shot mostly in dim and smoky rooms, the rich lighting and busy sets suggesting a decadent, sweltering Morocco. Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman fill the frame with charisma and electricity. Bergman, in particular, is often shot in hazy, glowing lighting, as if her beauty is so commanding it borders on divine. The script is a masterclass in storytelling centered around Rick's arc. With the Allied causes icon on the line, can the love-weary loner learn to stick his neck out? Can he mend the broken heart that made him that way? It's a beautiful bit of character growth, rounded out with memorable accomplices who challenge or shape Rick in some way, Ilsa the lost love, of course, and Victor Laszlo, the idealistic hero, the shifty Louis, the cutthroat Strasser, plus the many other friends and agitators. All perfectly cast and acted. More than the overall story, though, it's the individual moments that steal your heart, Rick and Ilsa locking eyes for the first time, their drunken argument, Rick rigging the roulette table to save a poor soul, and, of course, those foggy final few minutes. I have two minor complaints about the film, neither enough to knock it from its pedestal, but both nuisances. First is that, as great as the final scene is, the amount of contrivance and double-crossing in the third act required to set up those last few minutes is a bit convoluted, If you can easily summarize what Rick, Laszlo, Ilsa, Louis, and Strasser each understand at any given moment, you're savvier than me. Thank goodness what it leads to is satisfying enough to wash everything else away. My second complaint is not the movie's fault, really. It's been so over-referenced and quoted and parroted that it's hard to take the iconic moments at face value. Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine, is an absolutely beautiful turn of phrase that will never feel as lovely and heartbroken as it should, because, example, it's also the name of a Fall Out Boy song. Nonetheless, it's hard to top Casablanca for pure Hollywood magic and storytelling. I know it's such a cliché to call it one of my favorites, but it undeniably is. She didn't say, "Play it again, Sam." He did say, "Of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she had to walk into mine." The script wasn't even finished when they started. Rick was going to be played by Ronald Reagan, and all Ingrid Bergman wanted was to get it over with quickly so that she could make For Whom the Bell Tolls with Gary Cooper. The plot was a nonsense, politically speaking, and in the flashback sequences, relating to Rick and Ilsa's affair in Paris, there are some of the most ludicrous back projection shots ever contrived. What is it about this film that gives it classic status? Why should a movie with a foreign-sounding name about wartime refugees, a corrupt French cop and a cynical American nightclub owner stand out above the Hollywood studio's production line? The answer lies in one word: style. Hungarian director Michael Curtiz, who could hardly speak English, had just finished Yankee Doodle Dandy that won Jimmy Cagney an Oscar. The only thing Curtiz has to say is, "Don't do it the way I showed you. Do it the way I mean," Cagney said. He was a perfectionist, with a defined visual identity and the ability to draw strong performances from his actors. Bergman plays Ilsa, the enigmatic wife of the Free French Resistance hero Victor Laszlo, an uncharismatic performance from Paul Henriot, who arrives at Rick's Café Américain one evening and sees Sam, Dooley Wilson, at the piano. She is there with her husband to try and purchase exit permits, so that they can leave North Africa before the Nazis catch up with them. She remembers Sam from Paris and, if he is here, Rick, Humphrey Bogart, cannot be far away. Essentially a love story, Casablanca is darker than a camel's eyeball. Although not an ugly drunk, Rick is certainly alcoholic. A wounded romantic, who had been stood up by Ilsa when they planned to run away together before the Germans marched into Paris, his view of life has hardened over the intervening years. "I stick my neck out for nobody," which is why his friendship with Cap Louis Renault, an inspired Claude Rains, the police chief, fits so well. Both men recognize the fallibility of human nature and essential absurdity of honorable intent. Rick's past is a mystery. He smokes a lot and looks miserable most of the time, but deep down, and this is where Bogey's acting comes into its own, he has feelings that will not be compromised. What makes this special? Julius and Philip Epstein's ability to write dazzling one-liners, Bergman's luminous performance, "I don't know what's right anymore," Rains's memorable final words, "Round up the usual suspects," Wilson singing as time goes by, Bogey, in his trench coat, watching the plane take off, "We'll always have Paris." Heavy advertising exploitation campaign being given the picture by Warner's should also count at the BO. It's designed as was the quick release of the film after General Eisenhower's forces marched into the African city to take advantage of the publicity attendant to military events involving Casablanca. In other words, WB, instead of being dismayed at the town's changed status, is wisely cashing in on America's newborn familiarity with the title. Exhibs, in selling the picture, will do well to bear in mind that it goes heavy on the love theme. Although the title and Humphrey Bogart's name convey the impression of high adventure rather than romance, there's plenty of the latter for the femme trade. Adventure is there, too, but it's more as exciting background to the Bogart-Bergman heart department. Bogart, incidentally, as a tender lover, in addition to being a cold-as-ice nightery operator, is a novel characterization that, properly billed, might itself be good for some coin in the trough. Casablanca is pictured as a superficially gay town to which flee the moneyed refugees from Axis terror. There they await visas to Lisbon and then transportation to the United States. The waits are frequently interminable while arrangements for papers are being made with corrupt Vichy officials, and the wealthy help to allay their impatience with chemin de fer and other games at Rick's. Rick is Bogart, who has opened his fancy joint after being jilted by Bergman in Paris. Bergman turns up one evening with her husband, Paul Henriade, whom she thought was dead during the period of her romance with Bogart. Henriade is leader of the underground in Europe, and it is vital that he get to America. Bogart has 2 visas that will do the trick, and the choice is between going off himself with Bergman, their torch still aflame, or sending her off with Henriade, who can do so much for the United Nations cause. Bogart, as might be expected, is more at ease as the bitter and cynical operator of a joint than as a lover, but handles both assignments with superb finesse. Bergman, in a torn between love and duty role, lives up to her reputation as a fine actress. Henriade is well cast and does an excellent job too. Superb is the lineup of lesser players. Some of the characterizations are a bit on the overdone side, but each is a memorable addition to the whole. There's Claude Rains, as the charmingly corrupt prefect of police, Sidney Greenstreet, as the polite and insidious boss of Casablanca's underground traffic in visas, Peter Lorre, as a sinister runner of phony papers, Conrad Veidt, as the usual German officer, S.Z. Sokol, as a waiter in Rick's and a participant in the anti-Axis underground, and Leonid Kinski as Rick's bartender. Deserving of special mention among the lesser characters is Dooley Wilson, making his film debut. A Negro, he appears as the devoted friend and confidant of Bogart, as well as the piano player at Rick's. He sings with great effectiveness as time goes by, the theme song of the Bogart-Bergman affair, and otherwise entertainingly massages the keys and sings some old blues numbers. He was last seen on Broadway in Cabin in the Sky, and before that was a singing drummer in vaud for many years. Film is splendid anti-Axis propaganda, particularly inasmuch as the propaganda is strictly a byproduct of the principal action and contributes to it instead of getting in the way. There will be few more touching scenes to be found than when a group of German officers in Rick's begins to sing Nazi tunes and Henriade instructs the orchestra to go into La Marseillaise. A bit frighteningly at first, but then with a might that completely drowns out the Germans, the patrons, and help in Rick's give voice to the anthem of the France of liberty, equality, fraternity. It is just another facet of the variety of moods, action, suspense, comedy, and drama that makes Casablanca an A1 entry at the BO 1943, Best Picture, Director, Screenplay nominations, Best Actor, Humphrey Bogart, Sup. Actor, Claude Rains, B&W Cinematography, Editing, Scoring of a dramatic picture. Few films endure across generations with the quiet authority of Casablanca. Set against the uncertainty of war, it tells a deeply human story. A story that still resonates because it speaks to what men and women can be at their best. At the center is Rick Blaine, Humphrey Bogart, a man who projects hardness but carries a moral core that cannot be extinguished. His masculinity isn't loud or performative, it is steady, restrained, and ultimately defined by responsibility. Opposite him is Ilse Lund, Ingrid Bergman, whose femininity is expressed through grace, emotional depth, and loyalty. She is neither weak nor one-dimensional, she embodies the tension between love and duty with quiet strength. What makes Casablanca remarkable is how it honors the differences between men and women without diminishing either. Rick is called to act, to decide, to sacrifice, to carry the burden of doing what must be done. Ilse is called to feel deeply, to love faithfully, and to navigate impossible emotional terrain with dignity. Together, they form a complete picture of romantic partnership, distinct, complementary, and profoundly human. And at its heart, this is a love story, one of the greatest ever told. Not because it ends in fulfillment, but because it doesn't. The film understands something modern storytelling often forgets, that love is not just about possession or happiness, but about choosing what is right for the other person. Rick's final act is not one of loss, but of transcendence. Sacrifice becomes the highest expression of love. There is also a broader moral frame. In a world fractured by conflict, Casablanca reminds us that we are responsible for more than ourselves. Courage, loyalty, and care for others aren't optional virtues, they are the foundation of a functioning society. Overall assessment of Casablanca as a film: this is a masterpiece of storytelling and character. It captures the beauty of romantic love, the dignity of masculine sacrifice, the strength of feminine devotion, and the enduring truth that the best of us rise when we choose others above ourselves. A film not just to watch, but to reflect on, and to learn from. Movie magic, however conceptual a notion, offers insight into how motion pictures converge from multiple artistic influences under the sometimes chaotic circumstances of their creation. Filmmaking remains one of the few collaborative art forms in which artists come together to create a single product. And though the director often receives sole credit for the final result of a film, the cast and crew contribute their individual influences to the harmonious integration of technical and narrative elements. Casablanca is perhaps the most memorable film that, given its infamously frenzied production and now iconic status in the annals of film history and popular culture, fulfills all the possibilities inherent in movie magic. Made to be another cookie-cutter product of the Dream Factory, the production assembled top Warner Brothers talent, working from a script with no ending. That the film was ever completed is miraculous. Writers rushed fresh pages to the set on the day they were being shot, while actors performed without knowing their motivations. But any number of Hollywood films released during the Golden Age, an era whose arguable timeline exists from the mid-1920s to the mid-1950s, were assembled under similar conditions. And yet, only the timeless Casablanca has surpassed all precincts of era and story to gain status over the years, increase in popularity and enjoyment, and still inspire wonder even upon close re-examination. Writing about the film today can serve only to retread or flesh out the scores of exhaustive studies currently available, because, unanimous throughout the writings on Casablanca, is the bewilderment at how it came together. Much has been made of the bizarrely efficient disorganization that uniquely helped some of the picture's greatest moments retain their historic place. No matter how accomplished the scholar or enthusiast examining the picture, none of them can pinpoint exactly why the film turned out so well, if, in fact, there is any reason behind it beyond pure luck. Their analyses chart the progress of happenstance and twists of fate, arousing equally appropriate amazement and bafflement. Anecdotes are told on how various scenes came this close to being something completely different, and occasional attributions are given to producer Hal B. Wallis, director Michael Curtiz, the many writers, or the undeniable charisma of the actors. What slowly emerges from the assorted investigations is an understanding that by some marvel, Casablanca became the film we know and love today. And what a phenomenon, in particular when reflecting on how today's filmmakers and mega-conglomerate studios would react to such on-set commotion. Imagine if Casablanca were made in a contemporary market, with today's entertainment media scrutinizing behind-the-scenes mishaps, general last-minute decision-making, and studios unwilling to lose the millions dumped into A-list stars and special effects. A wave of negative buzz would undermine any chance of artistic or commercial success, as a modern studio would no doubt attempt to counteract the bad press with reshoots stemming from executive intervention and pre-screening surveys, leaving the result an unfocused mishmash, as so many current Hollywood films do. Instead, the protective net of expert, precise studio-era filmmaking supported the process under the organization and supervision mandated by Warner Brothers, the progenitors of Casablanca. Studios during the Golden Age churned out films according to an unyielding program wherein talent such as stars and technicians were contracted and paid according to a salary instead of per film, and motion pictures were released into theaters that the studios owned. This scheme condensed the entire art form into a business, aiming for demographically neutral movie making, bent on appealing to as many people as possible and selling as many tickets as possible at the lowest cost. And within these boundaries, the quality of the products released was occasionally sacrificed for manufacturing efficiency. For a director to have final cut was unheard of. Films were a product of the studio, however, each director lent their own weight. Some artists flourished under such conditions despite the system, John Ford, Howard Hawks, while others were still squashed by it, Orson Welles, Preston Sturges, thereby reinforcing the studio era's unsympathetic reputation. However unsavory such practices could be, most films from this era are lumped into that ever-ambiguous genre known as classic. For Warner Brothers, Casablanca was just another name on the production schedule for 1942. Story editor Irene Lee suggested Joan Allison and Murray Burnett's then unproduced play Everybody Comes to Rick's to producer Hal B. Wallis, who would later take credit for the discovery. Days after the attack on Pearl Harbor in early December of 1941, Wallis was already shopping an outline around to top brass and seeking approvals, which were casually given. The treatment story contained enough anti-isolationist commentary to rouse any American from their complacency, to get them to choose their duty to the world as human beings over their love for the individual, which is exactly what the self-sacrificial ending of Casablanca advises. But this thematic relevance was merely the device through which a thrilling melodrama was told. Without recounting each and every plot detail from a film that moviegoers have undoubtedly seen umpteen times, Casablanca interweaves themes of lost love, social narcissism, self-preservation, and patriotism. Each theme presents an ostensibly separate narrative strain incorporated by any one of the film's several writers, both credited and uncredited. Brothers Julius and Philip Epstein, Howard Koch, Casey Robinson, and other untraceable Warner Brothers stock writers collaborated through their assortment of notes, dialogue, and subplots. Jack Warner put forward nothing by way of creative input on Casablanca's production aside from recommending that George Raft star as Rick. Wallis replied to Warner via interstudio memorandum, insisting the role would be written for Humphrey Bogart's sensibilities. Bogart stars as Rick Blaine, an American expatriate whose upscale club, Rick's Café Américain, is the Moroccan city of Casablanca's top night spot. Populated by black marketeers, pickpockets, and an international gathering of witless travelers and unsavory types, Rick's, and of course, all of Vichy-occupied Casablanca bears a desperate and dangerous atmosphere. Except Rick's clientele is not his concern, a bitter and wounded man, Rick confirms, "I stick my neck out for nobody." His outlook is shared by most of Casablanca's temporary citizens, including the local Vichy authority and incorrigible opportunist Captain Louis Renault, Claude Rains, who answers only to visiting Nazi Major Heinrich Strasser, Conrad Veidt. After a murder theft in the first scene, 2 stolen signed letters of transit are obtained by the fraud thief Ugart, Peter Lorre. They provide safe passage through Nazi checkpoints all over Europe. Casablanca's sordid streets and markets are the waiting ground for lost souls hoping to escape Hitler's burgeoning reign, and whoever has the letters could gain transportation from Casablanca to Portugal and from there to freedom. Ugart passes the letters to Rick for safekeeping, and when Ugart is shot dead during his botched escape attempt from Renault's men, the letters conveniently stay with Rick and present the ultimate bargaining chip. Enter Czech resistance fighter Viktor Laszlo, Paul Henriade, and his wife Ilsa, Ingrid Bergman, who visit Rick on the advice of the Blue Parrot Cafe owner, Signor Ferrari, Sydney Greenstreet, to plead for the letters of transit. Meanwhile, Major Strasser has no intention of allowing Laszlo to escape Nazi capture once again, so whoever has the letters is under the hot lights of Nazi intimidation, Vichy establishment, and the suspicious eyes of Casablanca's seedy and bribable underground. Shaking Rick from his isolationist framework is Isla, with whom he shared a lover's tryst in Paris that ended abruptly when she left him for Laszlo. Heartbroken and sour since his abandonment, Rick refuses Laszlo and Isla the letters of transit, no matter the price, out of romantic spite. Her mere presence tortures him, punctuated by their song as time goes by, crooned by Rick's faithful friend and piano player, Sam, Dooley Wilson. When Isla confronts the forlorn Rick on her own, she explains that she believed her husband was dead in a concentration camp when she and Rick met in Paris, but when Laszlo resurfaced and was alive, she had to return to him. Still, being in each other's company rekindles their mutual ardor, and Rick agrees to help Laszlo if Isla stays behind. When they arrive at the airport, however, Rick sends husband and wife on their way, letting his love go in a gesture of self-sacrifice and nationalistic humanism. Film lovers can testify that any attempt at plot summary, even the skeletal outline above, barely hints at the film's subtexts and innuendos, each sewn into the narrative by Wallis' endless preoccupation with perfecting the script and tightening the many writerly strings, adding to the complex weave of conflicts that gloriously converge and resolve in the end. Short of analyzing each and every scene with equal parts academic and personal appreciation, no summary will ever capture the magic of what happens on screen, as every character is driven by secret motives and saddening backstories. What one comes to realize when attempting to summarize the film's events is that every moment is important to the narrative, every line of dialogue memorable, and every nuanced inflection by the cast is skilled acting beyond compare. Praising this or that moment becomes an arbitrary selection process because the entire film reads like a familiar, iconic textbook that must be watched, enjoyed, and loved to be appreciated. Though Wallis supervised the muddled production, too much emphasis is placed on the sordid details of its production history, which inevitably become central in discussions about Casablanca. These stories lend an interesting background, but hardly reveal anything essential about why the end result has earned its iconic status. What remains vital about how the film was made is the process by which the story was preemptively dissected, as if metonyms were selected before the decisive metaphor. Entendre-laden banter, visually dynamic setups, and flowing camera movements rushing to frame the uniquely handsome Bogart and stunning Bergman were perfected as a singular moment in cinema, with or without due consideration for the end product. Since writers were still compiling the story during filming, the cast and crew could only think about the scene as it was being shot. As a result, each individual moment in Casablanca has as much polish as the remainder. Taken from production materials from the Warner vaults detailing brief communications between Wallis, director Michael Curtiz, and other production staff, most making-of histories for Casablanca are bemused critical notes on how none of it should have worked but all of it did. Wallis' eye for detail becomes apparent in every memorandum. He insists upon an actual parrot outside of the Blue Parrot Cafe and sends Curtiz suggestions on how to incorporate subtext into various scenes. He famously wrote the film's last piece of dialogue after filming had wrapped in August of 1942, well into the post-production process. Bogart returned to loop Wallis' optimistic line, "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." Overseeing the production, Wallis managed every project from the charge of the Light Brigade to the Furies, keeping the on-set pandemonium from overwhelming everyone involved and even flourishing in this type of frantic creative environment. Behind the camera, Curtiz's ingenuity conceals the film's studio artifice, shooting on the Warner Brothers lot, save for a brief scene at Van Nuys Airport, afforded complete control over the set pieces and seemingly minor production elements. Even the final airfield scene was shot in the studio, with Curtiz using a wooden airplane veneer and little people to give the runway and its crew the illusion of distance and scale. This Hollywood trickery was masked by the abundant fog in the scene, which Curtiz insisted upon to hide his visual deception. His use of shadows and high-contrast lighting to activate his frame, for example, was long established in his Hollywood career before film noir was labeled a stylistic signature. Curtiz's place behind the camera affords each otherwise obvious moment a sparkle that cleans away and avoids feeling artificial or plagiaristic, rather the opposite. While much of Casablanca contains moody tonal signs of film noir photography, many of the attributed characteristics were simply those derived from Curtiz's necessity for personal style. Curtiz's talent is not simply the product of the studio system but an artistic force working within that system and succeeding despite its flaws. That audiences can watch Casablanca today, compare it to the directors Mildred Pierce or Captain Blood in technical and even thematic terms, and clearly identify where Curtiz's camera likes to go, how his shots zoom, how his pace never dawdles, and how through subtle emphatic additions he punctuates the drama in his screen stories speaks volumes for Curtiz being more than a faceless employee of a Hollywood studio. Without this director at the helm, Casablanca would have been another anonymous, generic release from the Warner Brothers production line. Without Humphrey Bogart, however, the picture would fail to envelop us as it does. Then, in his 40s, Bogart was typecast as Hollywood's tough guy in High Sierra and the Roaring Twenties. Rick Blaine, like Bogart, was an unlikely romantic figure, which is why Bogart's transformation into Rick is so powerful. That hardened misanthrope turned romantic at heart on-screen persona would follow Bogart for the rest of his career for roles in To Have and Have Not and The African Queen. After the film's release and success, Bogart surpassed Errol Flynn as Warner's top star, largely from the restructuring of his on-screen persona. Curious for a romantic lead, his long, worn features and unimpressive physique did not exude the characteristics of a sex symbol. In truth, Bogart was 2 inches shorter than Bergman, so he stood on books in their scenes together. And yet, his ease and magnetism as Rick draw the audience, as does the character's perceptible mystery. In Rick's Café Américain, nobody can stop talking about Rick, and when he finally appears, he is just as intriguing as we might expect. The role and the actor converge into a genuine performance, seductive and serious, but hidden emotionally and fascinating for it. Wallis borrowed Ingrid Bergman from David O. Selznick for $25,000, though she had originally turned down Casablanca to co-star in For Whom the Bell Tolls. In time, scheduling conflicts eased, allowing her to star in both. Bergman restrains her emotions in an unintentional yet affecting display of confusion, revealing the actress' inner uncertainty about where her character would end up, since no one knew the outcome of their film until shooting commenced on the final scene. Bergman's portrayal of Ilsa relies on her tortured expressions, which convey her wavering between her husband Victor and Rick. Cinematographer Arthur Edison, who also filmed The Maltese Falcon and Sergeant York, shot Bergman through soft filters that made her appearance dreamlike, her eyes glassy and ready for tears to fall. As it did with Bogart, Casablanca made Bergman into the Hollywood icon she is today, and only her performance in Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious challenges her glowing beauty and heart-wrenching depiction here. Overlooked next to the film's 2 headlining stars, Claude Rains' ever-present charm and elegant wit enliven Captain Renault, a character whose corruption knows no bounds. Renault accepts suggested sexual favors from young, attractive women for travel visas. He gambles and then a moment later shuts down the establishment for illegal gaming, but not before collecting his winnings, and fully enjoys the extravagances of his station. "It is a little game we play," he remarks about his tab, "they put it on the bill, I tear up the bill. It is very convenient." His dialogue is Casablanca's most flavored, lightened by Rains' fine intonation bordering on flirtatious admiration toward Rick discussing Ilsa. Renault comments, "She was asking about you earlier in a way that made me very jealous." Rains was typically a supporting actor, providing wise fatherly figures and devilish villains opposite lively heroes usually played by Errol Flynn. See The Adventures of Robin Hood, though he appeared, or not, as the title role in The Invisible Man. Classically trained, he always projected a smooth, likable presence, his wry smile adding to his allure. Indeed, opposite Bergman and Cary Grant in Notorious, he embodied cinema's only sympathetic Nazi. Warner Brothers rounded up the usual suspects from their expansive roster of stock players for Casablanca, but only Bogart and Dooley Wilson were Americans. The rest amassed from all over the world, most having fled Europe as Hitler came to power. Bergman was Swedish, Conrad Veidt was German, Paul Henriot and Peter Lorre were Austrian, Rains and Sidney Greenstreet were British, even director Michael Curtiz was Hungarian. Moreover, each player had their own matchless quality, from Lorre's groveling snivel to Greenstreet's slippery schemer of a voice. Mirroring the horde of international orphans gathered in one place as depicted in the film, the culturally diverse cast lent authenticity to the colorful types on and off screen. Upon the film's initial release in New York City on November 26, 1942, Allied forces invaded North Africa and eventually Casablanca, which Warner Brothers marketed as a modern parallel to raise awareness for the film. The wide release came more than a month later, to coincide with the meeting of Winston Churchill, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and General Charles de Gaulle at the Casablanca Conference. Earning a respectable profit at the box office and warm praises for being splendid anti-Axis propaganda, the film also won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Director, and Best Picture. Jack Warner accepted the Best Picture Oscar, even though traditionally the producer in charge of the production, in this case, the passionate, dedicated, and meticulous Hal B. Wallis, collects the statue. Wallis later voiced his resentment over Warner's move. And aside from the rare detractors such as noted critic Pauline Kael, the universal acclaim has grown over the years, placing the film near the top of most best lists after Citizen Kane, though, certainly, audiences the world over are more impassioned and emotionally devoted to Casablanca than to Orson Welles' picture. How appropriate then that As Time Goes By endures as Casablanca's theme. Composer Max Steiner wrote nearly his entire score to complement La Marseillaise, yet the musical accompaniment that audiences remember is Hermann Hupfeld's gentle 1931 song. What other impressions from the film could exhibit the same reflective, memorializing effect over its audience, just as the song does for Rick and Ilsa? When Sam sits at his piano, or Ilsa hums it to herself, the song wisps the characters away from the past, where love was easy and time seemed to float. The song elicits the same reaction for viewers because as it plays, we remember the joyful experience of the whole film and escape into the pleasant simplicity of the golden age of movie making, as much a product of an unsound but strangely proficient and industrialized studio system the film may be. As time goes by, the song and Casablanca itself stay with us, maturing through nostalgia and their enduring hypnotic spell. The film demands our attention over and over again, and multiple viewings and the observations therein inspire familiar scenes to blossom from narrative meaning and historical subtext. And only because Casablanca was constructed piece by piece, with attention never on the whole but rather on a specific moment, does the film seem imbued with layer after endless layer of individual meaning. Though virtually every scene and line of dialogue has been quoted, repeated, reused, and referenced, the film still captures us upon revisitation. We forget how individual lines or whole scenes are now clichés out of context, and we lose ourselves in the glory of the experience, allowing the effortlessness of this endearing romance to consume us. Scholarship, historical and interpretive analyses, and appreciations beyond count have been written about Casablanca, making any new words on the film inevitably redundant. And yet, there are new articles written every year attesting to the film's greatness, while at the same time hoping to capture exactly what makes it such an iconic, venerable piece of filmmaking. But the fact that the discussion continues despite the wealth of material already covered by historians, critics, and film aficionados remains the film's most probing accomplishment. It continues to fascinate audiences in a way that is beyond explanation, except to resolve that the picture seems to result from and fully encompass that somewhat fantastical notion of movie magic. A cynical expatriate American cafe owner struggles to decide whether or not to help his former lover and her fugitive husband escape the Nazis in French Morocco. This is the kind of iconic filmmaking that only gets better with each subsequent viewing. After my third viewing, now it's gone even higher up my ranking of the best films of all time. It has huge repeat value and it's a timeless film that has stood the test of time gloriously and has only become better with age. Casablanca is a romantic drama at its core, but it's also much more than that, as it somewhat defies genre classification given that it has many different tones and moods employed. It just as well can be viewed as an espionage and war picture. Unlike so many of its contemporaries in this period that was flooded with mediocre and dated World War II flicks, this one is actually quite modern in its sensibilities, as the spy elements are incredible and the movie's intensity is undeniably strong, especially in its powerful, unforgettable third act. It's one of the most genuinely entertaining films from the 40s and one that very easily can be shown to a person who has never seen an older black and white film and they will probably eat it up. It's a perfect film to start on your oldies journey, so it has immense importance because of that. Its pace is brisk and consistently the film is both riveting and even quite thrilling at times. But undeniably Casablanca is best seen for its romantic elements. The central romance between Ilse and Rick is undoubtedly one of the best in the history of cinema. Their relationship is just that iconic. The reason why it works so well lies in its very different tone and approach to storytelling. Unlike many other romantic pictures from the time, this one doesn't have a happy ending, but it also doesn't really have any happy moments at any moment of time during its runtime. The only joyous and truly light-hearted sequences are buried in the flashbacks, thus the movie was positioned as an ode to a love long lost, exhibiting one of the most melancholic atmospheres ever in a Hollywood feature. This sense of longing, regret and sadness is deeply pervasive, and this is what made the central relationship uniquely different. The dynamic between the two is sweet and adorable, but also genuinely tragic, as they know they will probably never be together. Rare are films that deal with love and romance from this opposite spectrum of emotions, and this one surely has a huge variety of different emotional beats, delivering at every single one of them. But of course the romance wouldn't have been half as strong hadn't it been for the iconic performances from its amazing cast. I have no idea why the Academy snubbed Ingrid Bergman for a nomination when this is in fact one of her best and most memorable roles. She is simply incredible here, radiant like a movie star and charismatic, but also truly vulnerable, heartbroken, and conflicted whenever the script asked for any of those emotions. She delivered at all of these beats, and just watching her facial expressions was very moving. As for Humphrey Bogart, he was nominated rightfully so. This is also one of his best and most famous roles for many great reasons. He is just as tough and as cynical as always, but here he is also a kind, sweet soul, and that duality was evident throughout. He played especially well his character's sad emotions. The two were just outstanding together, as their chemistry was definitely there in every scene. But there are other supporting players in this brilliant cast that need to be singled out for praise. Claude Rains plays Louis, the friend of Rick's, and the one guy responsible for that iconic final line about friendship. He was excellent as always and deserving of his Oscar nod. Paul Henriette is terrific, as well as the new partner of Ilse's in a lesser, but still important role. It was also wonderful seeing Peter Lorre in a small, but definitely memorable turn, as he is always very amusing whenever he is on screen. Casablanca looks fantastic and sounds wonderful as well, due to very atmospheric, almost noirish atmosphere and a grand orchestral score that really amplified the emotions on screen. The editing and pacing are also top-notch. It's a rare film that is consistently involving to watch. The sporadic humor is wonderful too, while the use of music in the themes of the story was wonderful. The dialogue is another highlight, as it's the type of iconic movie that's filled with so many to this day quotable lines. It's ridiculous just how quotable this film is. Michael Curtiz is a phenomenal director, and this is his career's best directed and most accomplished film. It was over 70 years ago that Casablanca hit the silver screen for the first time. All the main players are dead and gone now. The golden age of Hollywood, where pictures were being churned out with factory-like efficiency, has given way to a modern era of blockbusters. To borrow a quote from the movie, "It doesn't seem that one little film would amount to a hill of beans in our present world." Still, somehow Casablanca is beloved to this day, despite the numerous other films that have undoubtedly entered the black hole of film oblivion. It seemingly will not die, and for good reason. Considered one of the greatest films of all time, this well-loved classic deserves to be here. It is the hallmark of Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman's careers. It also has one of the greatest scripts of all time, and it has achieved legendary status over the years. Many consider it purely the best film ever made, and in all honesty, I would never try to refute that. The film opens quickly, and we are immersed in a world that is at the height of the Nazi terror, and many people are fleeing Europe by way of Casablanca. It is a treacherous place full of pickpockets, corrupt authorities, refugees, and naive tourists as well. 2 German couriers have been murdered, and some invaluable letters of transit have been stolen. That's when we are first introduced to Rick's Café Américain and its cynical proprietor Rick Blaine, Bogart. A shady fellow named Ugart, Peter Lorre, comes to Rick with the letters and asks Blaine to keep them for him. However, later that night Ugart is taken into custody, and things begin to get even more complicated. Wanted resistance leader Victor Laszlo, Paul Henriot, is now in Casablanca. However, a Major Strasser has arrived from Germany to take him in. To top it off, Laszlo's wife Ilse, Bergman, was Blaine's old flame in Paris and, needless to say, it didn't end well. Laszlo desperately needs the letters of transit to escape, and he inquires about them. Soon he is led to Blaine, but as Rick often admits, he sticks his neck out for nobody. Knowing all too well that he is in danger, Laszlo still shows his defiance against his enemies by leading the people in a round of La Marseillaise, and as a result, Rick's is shut down. All the memories of Paris begin flooding back, and then Ilse confronts Rick in order to get the letters. This is possibly the most critical point in the film because this tense altercation ultimately renews the relationship between Rick and Ilse. Rick asks her to trust him, and he begins to take things into his own hands. The results of his actions created one of the great romantic and cinematic moments in the history of film. The whole film leading up to this point hints at it, but Rick truly is a sentimentalist at heart. He can live with the notion that they will always have Paris, and that leads him to commit a selfless act of love. This film holds such a tremendous presence in movie history, and upon seeing the movie it makes complete sense what all the hype is about. What more could you want than Bogey, Bergman, Casablanca, and some of the greatest quotes ever uttered? Do not forget the corrupt, but nevertheless lovable French Captain Louis, Claude Rains, who delivers some terribly witty lines. Honestly, he may be my favorite character in the whole film, and that's saying a lot. Then, of course, there is the immortal tune of As Time Goes By, sung by Dooley Wilson, which will forever be ingrained in film lore. However, you also gain an appreciation for the other interesting characters of Casablanca, some comical, some sympathetic, and others despicable. We have a rogue gallery of everybody under the sun, from Peter Lorre, Sidney Greenstreet, German soldiers, various guests, and all the staff at Rick's place. This movie has conflict and the uncertainty of war in practically every scene because at the time World War II was in full force. There are a broken romance and a forlorn hero who shows his courage in the end. As an audience, we come to realize the transformation of Rick into a truly great man. Ilse on her part has the most radiant face I have ever seen. It is wonderful that Casablanca succeeds as entertainment despite the fact that it is not modern. In fact, part of its charm is the black and white cinematography that helps make Rick's Cafe so atmospheric. It effectively makes each interior shot moody 34 and every romantic scene even more striking. I am very doubtful that they would ever be able to pull this film off in color. It just wouldn't work. You do not need explosions and violence either, only great characters and a story with both drama and humor to reel the audience in. Up until the final moments of the movie you are captivated the entire time. Then, fittingly, you are left with the two men walking off into the night with the words, "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship." In fact, with this film, my thoughts always go back to the script. Lines like "Here's looking at you kid, we'll always have Paris," and "Round up the usual suspects" are so rampant that you cannot possibly remember them all, and I doubt there will ever be another film that is so immersed in American cultural lexicon. Still, many of my favorite lines in the film are those that get overshadowed by the more famous ones. That is the sign of an amazing film that never grows old. Even those who have not seen this classic film like to think they have, because the influence of Casablanca reaches everywhere. I guess I'm rather an idealist myself, so I would like to think that even if 70 more years pass, we'll always have Casablanca. By the time I watched Casablanca, I already knew every line of dialogue. During my senior year of high school, I worked at Suncoast, a non-rental video store that sold VHS and Laserdisc movies. On monitors mounted throughout the store, we'd show whatever clamshelled, family-friendly title corporate was pushing. Think Free Willy. During the holiday season, corporate would ship washing machine-sized boxes of product for us to stock. Nothing stayed in the back room, so we'd be there well past midnight stacking copies of The Bodyguard and Sister Act. While we worked, we'd put on a movie. The monitors would be off, but we'd listen. Casablanca proved an employee favorite on those long nights. Though I'd never seen it, I loved the crackling dialogue. Lines like, "It would take a miracle to get you out of Casablanca, and the Germans have outlawed miracles." The story takes place during World War II in Casablanca. We meet Rick, an American expatriate played by Humphrey Bogart. He runs the most popular cafe in town. As Louis, the venal prefect of police played by Claude says, everybody comes to Rick's. Rick maintains a cool detachment from everything and everyone. That changes once long-lost flame Ilsa, played by Ingrid Bergman, walks in on the arm of Victor Laszlo, a resistance leader wanted by the Germans. Seeing Ilsa shakes Rick from his isolationist stance, and soon he's abetting the local resistance. The Germans retaliate by insisting Louis shut down the cafe. Amid the chaos of the police chasing everyone out, Rick demands an explanation. Great lines abound, but some of the film's best moments are visual. I didn't discover them until years later, when I finally sat down and watched the film. Nice touches like when the waiter checks his pockets after the pickpocket bumps him. Or the beat-perfect editing between Rick and Louis during the finale. And let's talk about that ending. Rick sends the love of his life away and goes off to a likely death. Happy? Hardly. Noble? Absolutely. Rick sacrifices his and Ilsa's happiness for the greater good that is Victor Laszlo. In an era where studios were allergic to unhappy endings, it's amazing this one went over. Further, it's impressive how the script doesn't have Ilsa waffle, even when she believes Rick has betrayed Victor. This casts her in an unflattering light, but her fallibility makes her relatable. And it's the surprising punch that ending packs that makes the movie. In a film overflowing with choice one-liners, iconic performances, and crisp direction, the shock of the untidy, bittersweet ending resonates, reinforcing the film's themes of nobility and sacrifice that transcend wartime propaganda. A true classic in every sense of the word. Rick Blaine, Humphrey Bogart, is the owner/manager of a cafe in Casablanca, Morocco. Casablanca is a stopping place of sorts, for those fleeing war-torn Europe on their way to the United States. Rick is an American with a complicated personal and political history. His cafe helps entertain weary émigrés as they wait for their visa papers. Rick is pretty weary himself, a cynical, hard-hearted character who sticks his neck out for nobody. Though Casablanca is a free and unoccupied French territory, there is an intricate mix of politics and nationalities. The recent murder of 2 German soldiers in possession of incontestable letters of transit ushers in the arrival of the German Major Strasser. Strasser, Conrad Veidt, is on the hunt for the murderer. He is also tasked to ensure that Victor Laszlo, Paul Henried, a leader of the resistance, does not come into possession of those letters. Into this delicate balance, and Rick's cafe, walks Laszlo and his companion Ilsa Lund, Ingrid Bergman. Laszlo is an international hero seeking help to escape, but Rick isn't inclined to be helpful. Particularly, when he sees his former love Ilsa on the arm of Laszlo. Not only is he bitter, but Rick is also caught up in a more personal game of politics with the French police captain Louis Renault, which allows him to successfully operate his cafe. He is not willing to jeopardize his business, especially for the woman who abandoned him in Paris on the eve of the German occupation. But Ilsa has a different memory of her abandonment. When she discovers that the letters of transit which she and Laszlo need have found their way into Rick's hands, she uses every weapon in her arsenal to get them. But not everything or everyone is as it seems in this place of shifting alliances. There is only a spoonful of movies that enjoy such a reputation as Casablanca, the romantic war drama directed by Michael Curtiz, which started winning over the world in late 1942. A standard inhabitant of top 10 movies of all time lists, This beloved classic is considered a part of the ABCs of filmmaking, taught and dissected in film schools from Vancouver to Auckland, from Santiago to Tokyo. If they were still with us, the screenwriters would get the hiccups every couple of seconds considering how often regular folks quote the immortal lines of dialogue from this film. The legacy and esteem of Casablanca have been further strengthened by numerous homages and obvious inspiration other films drew from Rick's special gin joint. What's particularly interesting here and what gives the entire story additional sentimental value and appeal is the fact that the people who made it most likely didn't have the slightest clue what kind of a long-lasting iconic picture they were making. Not when the script was being written, not when the film was being shot between May and August of 1942, not even after the film was shown to the public for the first time. Hollywood produced about 100 films that year, and no one in their right mind expected a huge financial success of Casablanca, let alone the impressive afterlife it's still enjoying 7 decades after its release. If we tried to pinpoint what exactly spurred the success of this capacity, we probably couldn't provide any conclusive answers, but there are certain elements that need to be mentioned. First of all, what demands to be recognized is the all-star team behind the camera, the Hungarian-born incredibly prolific director Michael Curtiz, who helped make Warner Brothers into what it was, one of the champions of the golden age of Hollywood, screenwriting brothers Julius and Philip Epstein, the boys who built a superb reputation as both script doctors and screenwriters, the Strawberry Blonde, Arsenic, and Old Lace, composer Max Steiner, who made his name with King Kong, Little Women, The Searchers, Gone with the Wind and others, accomplished cinematographer Arthur Edison, Robin Hood, The Thief of Baghdad, The Lost World, Frankenstein, the very productive editor Owen Marks and, of course, the great producer Hal B. Wallis, who helped bring to life such classics as The Maltese Falcon, The Fountainhead and True Grit. Equally impressive was the team in front of the camera, lead stars Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman, as well as the supporting cast of Claude Rains, Paul Henriot, Conrad Veidt, Peter Lorre and Dooley Wilson, were perfectly chosen to create complex characters from the script who inhabit the world of wartime Casablanca, successfully giving a feeling of realism to Rick's bar and its surrounding community. Moreover, the immediate success of Casablanca must be at least partly attributed to the studio's feeling for urgency and good timing, as Warner efficiently made use of current historical events that made the film's impact more powerful. Even though Casablanca was supposed to see the light of day in the spring of 1943, the premiere took place in November 1942, so as to correspond to the invasion of North Africa by the Allies. In addition to that, the general release was scheduled for January 23, 1943, when the Casablanca Conference with Roosevelt and Churchill was taking place. Casablanca initially came into existence in the form of a play. Story editor Irene Diamond managed to persuade producer Wallis to acquire the rights for Murray Burnett and Joan Allison's unproduced play Everybody Comes to Rick's, a stage play allegedly inspired by Burnett's trip across Europe in 1938, during which he and his wife had been surprised by anti-Semitism in the post-Anschluss Austria, while a visit to a nightclub in southern France gave birth to the idea of Bogart's character. Wallis soon gave the job of transforming the play into a script to Julius and Philip Epstein, but against the studio's wishes they soon took a hiatus and went on to work on Frank Capra's Why We Fight. Writer Howard Koch, who worked on Orson Welles' legendary The War of the Worlds radio drama, was then hired to continue the work on the script, but the Epsteins took over about a month later. Uncredited writer Casey Robinson labored on 3 weeks of rewrites, and even the producer Wallis contributed to the script by suggesting the everlasting "This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship" line, which was dubbed in a month after the end of filming. Michael Curtiz, the loyal soldier of Warner Brothers, got the gig only after Wallis' first choice, William Wyler, had to decline the offer due to scheduling conflicts. The main reason why Casablanca still holds a place in film theory books, popular culture, and oral tradition lies in its powerful storyline that easily gets through to people, featuring characters easy to relate to, dealing with a theme that has for centuries been the artist's inspiration for creating the best of stories, love and sacrifices we make for a greater cause. Set in the backdrop of the Second World War, evoking the notions of honor, loyalty, friendship, and duty, Casablanca is a classic which represents the very best the old Hollywood had to offer, and it's no surprise the film managed to stay afloat and still be celebrated 3/4 of a century since the premiere. It's also an interesting field for film analysis. One of the more interesting readings of the movie connects Bogart's character, the bar owner at first trying to remain neutral, careful, and isolated from what's going on around him, to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, consequently turning the character into a personification of the United States, an interesting theory further empowered by the very meaning of Casablanca, which is Spanish for White House. If we decide to ignore such analyses and take things at face value, Casablanca is still a technically impeccable film strong in all of its segments, which became even more than a sum of its remarkable parts thanks to its theme and the nature of its audience. Love, duty, honor and sacrifice have, after all, always been a crucial part of the human existence. The immortal Casablanca is the subject of Ronald Haver's superb behind-the-scenes account in the June 1976 American film. The story traces draft after draft of the screenplay's development, including screenwriter Howard Koch's addition of Rick's background as a gun runner during the Spanish Civil War. Years later, Koch wrote a treatment for a sequel called Return to Casablanca, set in the 1960s, in which the son of Rick and Ilse, raised by Ilse and Victor Laszlo, visits the North African town where he was conceived the night his mother, gun in hand, demanded a letter of transport from his biological dad. The studios passed on Koch's story, perhaps fearing that it would fare no better than the 1955 and 1983 TV versions of the classic film that had come and quickly gone. But Haver's story takes us back to the making of the glorious original, which cut away from the steamy reunion Koch's sequel would later have us believe took place. Courtesy of the American Film Institute. One of the most universally beloved films of all time, Casablanca has sometimes been dubbed the most successful American propaganda film of the 20th century. It hit theaters on the heels of the Second World War, and somehow managed to capture the national mood of hesitance and resistance toward involvement in the war. At the time, most Americans were wary of involvement in a new European conflict. They wondered, why should we stick our necks out? Isn't isolationism and neutrality a wise foreign policy? Public polling prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor was overwhelmingly against intervention, even as Nazi Germany invaded France and propped up its puppet Vichy government. Rushed into theaters in November 1942, Casablanca was remarkably timely. It arrived precisely when Allies under General Patton managed to recapture French North Africa, including the Moroccan city of Casablanca, one of the larger metropolitan regions in neutral Morocco during the war. Screenwriters Howard Koch and the twin Epstein brothers, Julius and Philip, based Casablanca on an unproduced play Everybody Comes to Rick's by Murray Burnett and Joan Allison, taking a few noted liberties here and there. The play was originally written with Clark Gable in mind as Rick, the suave cafe owner, but the film took a decidedly different route. Casablanca boasts an all-star cast of Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, Paul Henriot, Claude Rains, Peter Lorre and many others. It was, in many respects, a film about refugees that was also made by refugees. Many of the actors in Casablanca had faced the Nazi threat abroad in one way or another. Peter Lorre fled the Nazis for Hollywood. Ingrid Bergman left Germany when she witnessed the Nazi Party influence over the nation's movie making. Paul Henriot was dubbed an enemy of the Nazi Party. Conrad Veidt fled the Nazis with his Jewish wife, and numerous other European exiles and refugees served as extras or played minor roles in the film. The plot for Casablanca takes place a year prior to its release in December 1941. The film opens with a map of North Africa and an anonymous narrator, Lou Marcel, uncredited, who gives us crucial context. With the coming of the Second World War, many eyes in imprisoned Europe turned hopefully or desperately toward the freedom of the Americas. Lisbon became the great embarkation point, but not everybody could get to Lisbon directly. And so, a tortuous roundabout refugee trail sprang up Paris to Marseilles, across the Mediterranean to Oran, then by train or auto or foot across the rim of Africa to Casablanca in French Morocco. Here the fortunate ones, through money, or influence or luck, might obtain exit visas and scurry to Lisbon and from Lisbon to the New World, but the others wait in Casablanca, and wait, and wait, and wait. Suddenly, news arrives in Casablanca. 2 German couriers carrying important official documents have been murdered on a train from Iran. The murderers and their possible accomplices were last seen headed for Casablanca. In response, the local French Vichy police storm into the marketplace and begin rounding up suspicious-looking people. One man is gunned down in the street for possessing expired papers. He is shot directly beneath a sign featuring Marshal Pétain, head of the regional Vichy government, and a message which reads, "Je tiens mes promesses même celles d'autres," or "I keep my promises, just as I keep those of others," reminding us of the false promises of the Vichy government. Casablanca uses the geographic location of unoccupied French North Africa as a fascinating, shadowy, noiresque middle ground, or borderland, which is under the thumb of the domineering Nazi and French Vichy government. A crowded bazaar shows us a busy marketplace. The elaborate set was cleverly reused from an earlier Warner Brothers picture, such as the Desert Song, while overhead a Nazi plane lands at the airport. The airport sequences were filmed at Van Nuys Airport in Los Angeles. Despite ostensibly being a politically neutral city, Casablanca is under a curfew, and a spotlight swirls around the city, reminding us of the Nazis' far-reaching gaze. Throughout the city, scores of innocent refugees are desperate to flee westward. The transitory nature of the city of Casablanca represents a multicultural gathering place of people filled with fear and secrets, while hollow opportunists and pickpockets lurk throughout the market, vultures who prey on travelers who hear very little and understand even less. Everyone seems stuck, hoping for a way out, but caught in the middle is one American man expatriate named Rick Blaine. Who is Richard Rick Blaine? Sardonically played by the great Humphrey Bogart, the story of Rick is the story of America wounded by war. Rick is wary of foreign entanglements, but throughout the film he is transformed from a self-professed isolationist into a defender of the downtrodden, even a patriot. Deep down, he has always been a sentimentalist while presenting himself in a cynical shell. He is a man caught between extremes, neither hero nor a villain, yet he has the power to choose his exit from the shadows. Utterly impeccable lighting plays a key role in the film. Knowing that Nazi eyes and ears are everywhere in Casablanca, Rick claims, "I'm not interested in politics, the problems of the world aren't in my department. I'm a saloon keeper, and I stick my neck out for nobody, and I'm not fighting for anything anymore except myself. I'm the only cause I'm interested in." Rick is considered a difficult customer because one never knows what Rick will do or why. He is a tough, no-nonsense guy with a gruff demeanor. At one point, he laconically remarks that his nationality is as a drunkard and his past is kept deliberately murky. We learn that Rick was born in New York. He is 37 years old, and as a young idealist, he once fought alongside the underdog as a fighter on the loyalist side against the fascist Franco regime in the Spanish Civil War, and he ran guns to Ethiopia in its war against fascist Italy. Rick is, by all accounts, a left-leaning good guy who has taken a courageous stand against fascism. "I bet they're asleep in New York. I bet they're asleep all over America," he remorsefully speculates. In fact, Rick was once something of a hero in the underground movement against fascism. However, a mysterious tragedy befell him while he fled the Nazi invasion of Paris, and he wound up living under the pretense of neutrality, jaded in Casablanca while running a classy nightclub, Rick's Café Américain, a place where everyone goes. Why doesn't he return to America? Did he abscond church funds? Or run off with senator's wife? Or kill a man? Rick claims it's a combination of all three. He says he came to Casablanca for his health, for the waters, but when reminded this is a desert, Rick smugly claims he was merely misinformed. Amusingly, when filming Casablanca, Ingrid Bergman stood 2 inches taller than Bogart, so he often had to sit or stand on elevated boxes to appear taller. We first enter Rick's nightclub at eye level as whispers and shadows pervade the scenes. Sam, the black piano player, played by Dooley Wilson, sings "It Had to Be You," Wilson was actually a drummer, so he pretended to play piano. Sam is a close friend, trusted confidant, and also an employee of Rick's. As we pan throughout the nightclub, we are given snippets of conversations, people plotting their escape from Casablanca. A woman tries to sell her diamond jewelry, men discuss getaway boats and trucks bustling out of the city. This is a remarkably cosmopolitan club filled with many different languages spoken by Asians, Middle Easterners, Europeans, and Americans. Apparently, some 34 different nationalities appear in the film, and Rick employs people of all stripes in his club, including Sam the piano player, Dooley Wilson, Sasha the Russian bartender, Leonid Kinski, Bogart's drinking buddy, Emile the croupier, Marcel Dalio, a legendary star of French cinema who appeared in classics like Jean Renoir's La Grande Illusion and La Règle du Jeu, and Karl the German headwaiter, S.Z. Sokol, typoed in the credits as S.K. Sokol. Sam is also occasionally joined by a cabaret singer, played by Karin Mura. And there is also a Norwegian jewelry seller named Berger, who is secretly a resistance fighter. We who are still free will do what we can. We are organized, monsieur, underground like everywhere else. In the club's private backroom, illicit gambling takes place. A Dutch banker, Torben Meyer, who runs the second largest banking house in Amsterdam, sits at a gambling table and asks Carl the waiter if Rick will join him for a drink, but Rick maintains a policy of not drinking with customers, even to Dutch bankers who offer money for a drink with Rick. Unlike most people in Casablanca, Rick cannot be easily bribed or compelled. We first meet Rick as he signs a check for 1,000 francs, beside an empty martini glass, smoking a cigarette, playing a game of chess by himself. It was Bogart's idea to include the chessboard. He confronts a German banker from Deutsche Bank, Gregory Gay, and kicks him out of the back room, even though the man claims to have been in every gambling room between Honolulu and Berlin. As he storms off, the banker threatens to report Rick to Der Angriff, a Nazi newspaper whose title means the attack. Is Rick prejudiced against bankers? Surely not, because Dutch banker who runs the second largest banking house in Amsterdam is allowed to gamble. Even from the outset, we are given clues that Rick still maintains a staunchly anti-Nazi attitude. After all, he has been doing it all his life. Later, he rips up a German check at the bar. The moment is so subtle you might miss it. He dismisses his sometimes girlfriend named Yvonne, Madeleine Lebeau, because she had too much to drink. Rick asks his bartender to take her home and come straight back, whereas other men might have taken advantage of her. Rick has a quiet nobility to him in these early scenes. We also meet another nightclub owner named Signor Ferrari, Sydney Greenstreet, a large, jovial man wearing a fez who reportedly has a monopoly on the black market in Casablanca. Here, we are asked to contrast Rick and Ferrari. While Ferrari has made his own business deals, Rick tries to remove himself entirely. My dear Rick, when will you realize that in this world today, isolationism is no longer a practical policy, says Ferrari. A lesser club, Ferrari runs the Blue Parrot, a loose establishment more akin to an open-air bazaar than a bar, and he routinely offers to buy Rick's cafe, but Rick refuses. When Ferrari offers to buy Sam instead, Rick curtly responds, "I don't buy or sell human beings." In spite of his disillusionment, Rick still stands for the greatest of American values. A final point about Ferrari: he has apparently established a very lucrative business for himself with the captain of the Vichy police, in which he collects hefty sums of francs in exchange for delivering attractive young women who are seeking their visas. One of the significant recurring subplots in the film concerns a pair of Bulgarian newlyweds, Jan and Anina Brandl, Helmut Danton and Joy Page, who are fleeing Bulgaria, where the devil has the people by the throat, in the hopes of finding safety and freedom in America. They have been married for a mere 8 weeks but don't have enough money to pay Ferrari for visas, and Anina wrestles with the prospect of sleeping with Renaud in exchange for visas. All the discussion of sex in the film is handled with the utmost care in order to avoid the ire of the censorious Hays Code. The Brandels try to win enough money for their escape at Rick's gambling tables, and in taking sympathy on this young couple, Rick helps them cheat by quietly instructing Jen to bet all his money number 22 at the table in the back room. The captain of the police is Captain Louis Renault, Claude Rains, an amusing French prefect who claims to be politically neutral. He bends with the prevailing winds wherever they may lead. In this case, in spite of believing himself to be master of his own fate, Renault is ruled by the Nazis. Captain, are you entirely sure which side you are on? He is frequently flanked by his aide, Lt. Cass L., George D., and Captain Tonelli, Charles Latoure, of the Italian service, both of whom are often seen squabbling with one another. He is a known womanizer who trades visas in exchange for liaisons with young women. He envies how women are attracted to Rick, yet he still respects Rick and is even friendly with him. Renault strikes us as an amoral character at first, however he also has a very subtle disgust for the Germans, particularly for the Major Heinrich Strasser, Conrad Veidt, who arrives in Casablanca because a top target of the Nazis is set to arrive, a well-known Czechoslovakian resistance leader and freedom fighter named Victor Laszlo, Paul Henriot, who has escaped the clutches of the Nazis no less than 3 times across Europe, including after serving 1 year in a German concentration camp. He and his wife are set to arrive imminently in Casablanca. Everyone knows Victor Laszlo will be desperately searching for a way out of Casablanca, but Major Strasser plans to keep him trapped ad infinitum. Rick and Captain Renault make a wager of 10,000 francs over whether or not Victor and his wife will make it out of Morocco. How could they escape? The central MacGuffin of the film concerns those 2 stolen irrevocable letters of transit, and as it turns out, one of Rick's acquaintances, Signor Guillermo Ugarte, Peter Lorre, an Italian black market dealer in North Africa, has these transit papers in his possession. They are signed by either General Charles de Gaulle or General Maxime Weygand. The pronunciation in the film is muffled, the latter of whom was the military Vichy commander in French North Africa. Either way, Ugarte plans to sell these papers for a fortune before escaping westward himself, but for now he gives them to Rick. Unlike other people in Morocco, Rick is trustworthy and respected. Notably, Rick hides the stolen papers inside Sam's piano, while Sam appropriately plays the song Who's Got Trouble? Knock on wood, and soon Ugarte is arrested and killed. However, the story takes a turn when the Czech resistance leader Victor Laszlo arrives at Rick's club later that evening with his wife on his arm. She is one of the most beautiful women ever to set foot in Casablanca, named Ilse Lund, played by the radiant Ingrid Bergman, whose face is captured by cinematographer Arthur Edison in soft, veiled, almost saintly photography throughout the film. As it turns out, she is a mysterious woman from Rick's past, and the catalyst for all of his tortured, alcoholic romanticism. Of all the gin joints of all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine. In a flashback from some time ago, Rick and Ilse met in Paris and quickly fell in love. Rick was a left-leaning revolutionary of sorts, on the Nazi blacklist, and Ilse both loves and admires him for it. At the time, they had a rule of no questions, but Ilse once admitted there was another man in her life, but that now he's dead. As Ilse and Rick drift through Paris, sailing on the Seine, smiling by the Eiffel Tower, and listening to their friend Sam play a heart-achingly beautiful song entitled As Time Goes By, Rick frequently toasts to Ilse, "Here's looking at you, kid." The last time they met was La Belle Aurore, the day the Germans marched into Paris. Rick remembers every detail. The Germans wore grey, while she wore blue. But when they try to escape, Rick is left standing alone in the rain at the train station, with a note in his hand from Ilse claiming she cannot go with him. Distraught, Rick leaves Paris on the train to Marseilles. Now in Morocco, Rick blames Ilse for breaking his heart. He angrily refuses to give Victor and Ilse the transit papers until Ilse reveals the truth. She and Victor were married, though they kept their marriage a secret even from close friends. But one day Victor was arrested and placed in a Nazi concentration camp. For months, Ilse frantically tried to receive word of his whereabouts until the sad news reached her that while Victor was trying to escape, he was killed. In her loneliness, she and Rick struck up a wonderful romance. However, around the time that the Nazis invaded France, Ilse discovered that Victor had survived, and while he was sickly, he needed tending. This is why Ilse abandoned Rick. Meanwhile, inside Rick's club, confrontations between the Germans and everyone else reach a boiling point, culminating in the famous scene of the dueling anthems. It begins with a rowdy cohort of Germans singing the Nazi anthem Die Wacht am Rhein, the Watch on the Rhine, which is quickly overwhelmed and drowned out by a rousingly patriotic rendition of La Marseillaise led by Victor Laszlo, with subtle approval by Rick. It is an incredibly moving, inspirational moment, which apparently brought tears to the eyes of the cast and crew on set, many of whom had actually fled from the Nazis themselves. This patriotic musical number earns the ire of the Nazis. Major Strasser instructs Captain Renault to find an excuse to close down Rick's club, at which point Renault comically remarks he's shocked to find gambling is going on in here, while also collecting his personal winnings. Despite having to close on a tight budget, Rick promises to keep his whole staff salaried. Shortly thereafter, Rick comes to his senses and devises a plot to help Victor and Ilse escape from Casablanca. He sells his club to Ferrari and persuades Captain Renault that he will help him ensnare Victor Laszlo, thereby letting him win the 10,000 franc bet, but Rick ultimately betrays Renault and leads Victor and Ilse out to the airport, convincing Ilse she must depart with her husband. If that plane leaves the ground and you're not with him, you'll regret it. Maybe not today, and maybe not tomorrow, but soon, and for the rest of your life. Rick claims he has a job to do and that he and Ilse will always have Paris. He tragically lets her go, and when Major Strasser arrives on the scene, Rick shoots him dead. He has finally come full circle in the film. As the police close in, Renault decides not to arrest Rick and instead to round up the usual suspects. He then pours himself a drink, but upon noticing that it is Vichy water, he disgustedly tosses it into the trash and kicks it over. With both men facing trouble, Rick and Renault discuss plans to travel together to the Free French garrison at Brazzaville, using the 10,000 francs Rick has evidently won from Renault. The film closes with a new beginning as Max Steiner's triumphant motif of La Marseillaise plays and Rick remarks, "There is a fear with all black and white movies regarding whether or not they will stand the test of time, become a timeless classic or fall by the wayside due to dated acting and laughable special effects." Often cited as not only a classic for the romantics, but for film lovers in general, it's safe to say Casablanca has established itself as the former, and rightly so. Humphrey Bogart is as cool as ever during his portrayal of Rick, the owner of an American bar in Casablanca. White suits, cigarettes, alcohol, let's just call him a smartly dressed James Dean and be done with it. But this rebel does have a cause, to get out of Casablanca. Casablanca is so unlike any other romantic film, it's almost an anti-romantic movie. After a loving fling in Paris years earlier that ended in disappointment, Rick sets up shop in Casablanca running his own bar. That's until his old flame Ilse comes to town with a husband in tow. Unable to rekindle the romance, Rick instead sets his sights on improving her situation by helping her and her husband escape from Casablanca and onto American shores. Lovable rogue, old romantic, and anti-hero are all ways of describing Rick, but the flashbacks during the movie help the audience see a sentimental side to his character, who is so usually unmoved and carefree. It's not your conventional romantic boy meets girl scenario, but that isn't a bad thing. The story concentrates more on its characters than the story between them. At no point do you get the feeling that these two are star-crossed lovers destined to end up together, but it doesn't make you care any less when you reach the emotionally tragic ending. Don't say a word, I know exactly what you're thinking. What kind of critic do I purport to be if I give the greatest film ever made only 4 out of 5 stars? Yes, I see you all shaking your heads in disbelief that I could give the same less than perfect rating to Gone with the Wind. The worst part of reviewing a great classic film is that, if you give it anything less than the highest rating possible, you spend more time talking about what you feel is wrong with it than what's right, and it comes off as sounding like a negative review, even if you think the movie is very good. After having watched Casablanca, I was depressed that I did not find within it whatever qualities that others have found such reverence for. Perhaps more viewings will reveal it to me in the future, but I've seen this film 5 times already, as of this writing, and each time I'm left with the same feeling. It's a very good, well-written film, but less than the greatest film ever made. I would not blame anyone for disagreeing with my assessment, but in my reviews, I always strive to be honest and consistent within my own beliefs. Casablanca is set in the middle of World War II in Casablanca, a part of unoccupied France, where an American former freedom fighter named Rick Bogart, the Maltese Falcon, runs a popular nightclub. This club is frequented by people who've made the long journey in order to try to get passage to America, away from the Third Reich's iron-fisted rule. Rick happens to get a hold of a couple of letters of transit, which allow unquestioned travel out of Casablanca, which can never be revoked. Very valuable stuff indeed. The Nazis are also in town, with the local French police captain, Rains, Lawrence of Arabia, doing everything he can to appease them. Things get tense when an underground Czech rebel named Viktor Laszlo, Henriette, now Voyager, arrives, and along with him is Ilsa, Bergman, spellbound, a former love of Rick's who deserted him in Paris some years back. Ilsa needs the letters of transit before Viktor is sent to a concentration camp, but the embittered Rick is still angry at her, causing emotional strife for all players involved. Casablanca is a well-made, intelligent film, strengthened by terrific performances and flavorful characters that are the highlight of the eternally quotable script, not to mention it contains the forever memorable song As Time Goes By. As a film, it's perfectly directed and brilliantly edited, with almost no scene or character shown needlessly, always progressing the story or giving more information about certain characters. So why not 5 stars? Unfortunately, for as well made as I found Casablanca, it never transcended to another level for me. While I enjoyed the film thoroughly, and very highly recommend it, I found myself feeling rather aloof to the goings-on despite the undeniably compelling moments. Although I may have personally found it not to seem worthy of all of the immense critical acclaim it has received over the many years, don't let that put you off. Casablanca is still a must-watch classic film, particularly for fans of the 2 leads. It came to my attention earlier this week that this movie recently had an anniversary. That reminded me of when I first saw it at the age of 17 on TV, of course. I think it was a lazy Sunday afternoon. I was in the living room, watching TV, and eating cranberry sauce straight out of a can. And this fascinating movie came on. I'd heard of it and the oft misquoted line from the film. "Play it, Sam, not play it again, Sam." But that opening sequence pulled me right in. The first appearance of Claude Rains as Captain Renault. Round up the usual suspects. The man gunned down in the street. The Nazis. The opening narration. With the coming of the Second World War, many eyes in imprisoned Europe turned hopefully, or desperately, toward the freedom of the Americas. Lisbon became the great embarkation point. But, not everybody could get to Lisbon directly, and so a tortuous, roundabout refugee trail sprang up, Paris to Marseilles, across the Mediterranean to Oran, then by train, or auto, or foot across the rim of Africa, to Casablanca in French Morocco. Here, the fortunate ones through money, or influence, or luck, might obtain exit visas and scurry to Lisbon, and from Lisbon, to the New World. But the others wait in Casablanca, and wait, and wait, and wait. This film, directed by Michael Curtiz, screenplay by Julius J. Epstein, based on Everybody Comes to Rick's, produced by Hal B. Wallis, starring Humphrey Bogart, cinematography Arthur Edison, edited by Owen Marks, music by Max Steiner, production company Warner Brothers Pictures Incorporated, distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures Incorporated. Release dates November 26, 1942. Running time 102 minutes. Country United States. Language English. Budget $878,00. $1 million. Box office $3.7 to $6.9 million.